Breaking news tonight, the governor of Ohio has declared a state of emergency in one of the state's biggest cities. Residents in Toledo are stranded without any drinking water. With me, Frank Gaffney, president, Center for Security and Policy. All right, good evening, Frank. The drinking water in the fourth largest city in Ohio is now toxic, possibly because of algae from Lake Erie. I've never heard of anything like this. How does this happen?
You know, Judge, we take the critical infrastructure of this country for granted. It's kind of like oxygen. We assume it's always going to be there. Water is one of the necessities of life, of course. And the fact that so much of us have, so many of us have so much of it in, a pristine condition every day is nothing but in short, a small miracle. And I think what is happening in this case is apparently algae that is spawned by fertilizer and manure and stuff running off farms into Lake Erie has caused a bloom of this toxic material that is close to an intake for the drinking water for the people of Toledo. And it's put them in considerable jeopardy, not least because evidently if you boil the water, which is normally something that you can do to make it more pure and drinkable and so on, it actually makes it even more toxic.
Right.
This is a crisis of the first order.
Right, and you can't bathe in it, you can't cook in it, you can't boil it. I mean, frightening stuff, Frank.
Yep.
And I have to tell you, it reminds me of, how critical our infrastructure is. And you and I have spent a lot of time on the grid and our frustrations about the vulnerability of our infrastructure, whether it be the electrical or, water. The fact is, and all night we've been talking about, the rest of the world pretty much going to hell in a handbasket, and are not being the most popular people around. What do you fear?
Well, there's two pieces to this. One is that naturally occurring phenomena like this exercise in Toledo, or in the case of the electric grid, an immense solar storm can have devastating effects on this critical infrastructure. So can enemy action, both with respect to, aquifers and drinking water supplies and the grid. In both cases, it seems to me that we need a different posture, a different attitude for this starting point, a different attitude to get us to a different posture with respect to these infrastructure questions. We have to recognize that our nation, as one of my colleagues has recently pointed out to me, our nation cannot sustain the kind of population size we have today, some 300 million people, if the infrastructure that we rely on, whether it's the power grid, whether it's all the things that it makes possible, from drinking water to food distribution to medicine to transportation, telecommunications, finance, all of that were to go away, so would an awful lot of us. And this is why, as you know, Judge, we have a Secure the Grid coalition, which people can find out more about at securethegrid.com, to try to help people understand, A, what these vulnerabilities are and how we can take steps, particularly in the case of the grid, to remedy them, as the Defense Department has done for 50 years with respect to some of their key assets.
And we've spoken about this on the grid of the Carrington effect and the solar storm and all of the vulnerabilities. Yes. And, whenever we do, I have to tell you, Frank, I mean, the viewers are very interested in this. They want to know where they can go for food and water and, how they survive. But, I never thought that I would hear that the water was being, it was poisoned basically by algae. And if that's the case, it seems like a relatively easy thing to happen. But what about Congress? What are they doing? They went home again.
Well, I'm heartened to say that with respect to this business about the electric grid being vulnerable to everything from the kind of solar storms that occurred 2 years ago, last week or so, which very nearly hit our planet and would have caused devastating effects, to the kind of man-caused attacks that could have a similar kind of damage. There is a bill in the Homeland Security Committee called the Critical Infrastructure Protection Act that Congressman Trent Franks, one of your guests frequently, and Congressman Pete Sessions have advanced. Michael McCall, the chairman of the committee, who I think has also been one of your guests, Judge, has indicated that he intends to bring this bill that will establish as a national planning scenario this kind of threat, which would, for the first time, really put it on the map with those both at the federal level and at the state and local level who are responsible for helping us survive these kinds of contingencies. It's a small but very important first step towards the fixes that we both know need to take place.
And you know what? They're fighting with each other. Nobody thinks much of Congress anymore, but you know what? We ought to demand that they take care of us. Frank Gaffney, always
this is a place we can come